And it looks like we're live. Okay. Well, welcome to another week of live chat. We're back on our Wednesday schedule, and we have another tropical system that we're going to be keeping an eye on. The good news right off the bat is that this will not be a threat for the East Coast. I know that some of you guys have been kind of... we're not coming up live on YouTube? Oh, that is weird. We are... Why isn't it coming up live? Oh, hold it. There we are. Now it just popped up. Look at that. You know, you gotta love technology. You're thinking you're live, and then you're like talking, and no one's hearing you because you're not live. Good job, YouTube. Okay, so restart, reset. Mets are restarting, resetting. Everything's going to be fine. Let's talk about the evolution of what's going on in the tropics. We have a new tropical system, Ernesto, that is really starting to pick up speed in terms of development and really getting its act together. And because it is evolving, a lot of people are keeping an eye on it because it's impacting parts of Puerto Rico, at least it did. And, you know, the typical individuals are posting a lot of interesting content out there about maybe being a threat for the East Coast. I could say without a doubt that it is not a threat for the East Coast. And what I want to do this evening is to teach you to know when a system is a threat or not. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on this evening, and we'll take a look at the pattern overall, and of course take all of your questions. So let's look at Ernesto now. This is a very, very healthy storm. How do we know that? Well, first of all the convection is starting to fire up right around the low-level center, which is right around here. But there's other features here that are really cool too. All right, so first of all, take a look at how all of the cirrus cloud is kind of outflowing. You see how it's kind of doing this, kind of fanning out. This is a sign that the anticyclonic circulation at the top of the storm, which is key for warm core low pressure systems, is maturing. Now, the northern half of this has been enhanced by the interaction with the trough that is going to eventually turn this storm to the north. It is now moving to the northwest. In fact, the latest data here, we can pull that up. I think it might be, it's one of these. There we go. This one right here. It's moving to the northwest at 16 miles per hour. The winds are up to 80 miles per hour. You can see the forecast here that is showing up on the NHC. As you can see, no threat in any way, shape, or form to the East Coast. This morning I mentioned, especially for premium members, one of the keys I look for in terms of forecasting threats for the East Coast is whether or not it crosses 70 west. That's kind of my marker. If it's already turning north to the east of 70 west, it's not going to be a threat for us. But why is that the case? Why is that an important factor? Well, let's take a look at the upper level winds. When we're studying the 500 millibar pattern, one of the key factors that you really want to study is where is the trough axis ahead of the storm on the East Coast. So when you have the trough axis right here, just off the East Coast, that's going to support a southwesterly wind and southwesterly steering currents ahead of the storm. Also, the base of the trough tends to pull these tropical low pressure systems north. It's kind of like a magnet almost. So initially, this southwesterly wind enhances this outflow that we could see right here. Oh, and the Mets just hit another home run. Alonso hit a home run. About time. Thank God. Maybe the Mets are waking up again. So you can see this outflow here, right? So when you have this enhancement, it allows for the latent heat to rise and then exit. And that's key, okay? Because this engine that is the warm core if it doesn't allow that exit, if it doesn't allow a way for the latent heat to escape, then it basically chokes on itself. And the storm basically collapses. So in this case, this environment is going to allow for rapid intensification, which is what we're starting to see now. Notice the explosion of convection that's starting to show up here. Of course, it doesn't hurt that there's very warm waters here in the Atlantic. I know that Climate Central already put out some wordage about like how climate change enhanced the threat. That is to me, that's kind of a silly statement. Look, it's mid-August and there was a tropical storm in the northern Leeward Islands. That's not something that's unusual. That's something that's expected. So to say that it enhanced the potential by 50% is a ridiculous statement, because it basically happened when it's supposed to be happening. If we're talking about this happening in May, then yeah, that's a climate effect. Or in late November or December, then yeah, there you go. But that's kind of like saying, wow, we have tornadoes in the middle of tornado season in the tornado alley. It's like, yeah, no kidding, that's what it does. So it was kind of a ridiculous statement. But as far as the development here, why do we think that this is going to become a major hurricane? Well, there's nothing really to limit the intensification process. While the storm is moving north, the winds overall are going to be relatively light. There's not really any type of strong shearing mechanisms here to inhibit the storm strength. And again, there's plenty of warm water to work with. So when you have that type of environment, you're going to support an intensifying low pressure system. But why are we so confident this is going to stay out in the Atlantic? And why did I say even last week, while there was some guidance producing storm tracks along the East Coast, that I wasn't buying it, that it was likely going to remain out in the Atlantic? I was very confident about that. In fact, I put out a discussion saying most of this August, we're going to be protected. Why is that the case? Whenever you have a trough axis here, it acts like a goalie. It protects the East Coast, because what this sets up is a southwesterly wind component for much of the Western Atlantic, and it displaces the Western Atlantic ridge further into the Central Atlantic. So whenever you see this trough axis constantly remaining in place on your observations and in the model guidance, any type of solution, unless you have a tropical system down here in the Caribbean that has any type of influence on the northern mid-Atlantic, it's just not going to happen, okay, because of this steering current. The other thing, too, is that this is a progressive pattern. So even when you have this little ridge axis that's going to be moving through to, tomorrow afternoon through Friday afternoon, you still have another trough here that's going to be marching. And also notice the orientation of these troughs. This is the big one, because what is the question we get the most? It usually ties in with, can this be like Sandy? And that is the negatively tilted trough and cut off upper level low. In this pattern, notice all the troughs are in what we call a positive tilt. The stronger winds are on the eastern side of the jet stream of the trough, and you have kind of like a shape that is more southwest to northeast. Whereas when you have a negatively tilted trough, you have a trough that's having the stronger winds on the backside of the trough and capable of intensifying and tilting into a negative state that would pull storms closer to the coast. In this case, in this pattern, we have no support for that. And typically, in order to get a negatively tilted trough, you need high latitude blocking, like a negative NAO or a negative Arctic oscillation. And as we've been discussing for the past couple of weeks, we just don't have any type of blocking like that. All right, you can get that type of blocking in the summer, but there's none this summer. Everything has been very progressive, very fast moving. So as a result, anything that's trying to approach the Western Atlantic is just going to get kicked right out. Now, can there be situations where the timing is just right? Yes. but those are pretty rare and really hard to come by in this type of weather pattern. So that is the situation that we have developing here. And you can see it's really nicely here on the water vapor satellite picture. See this substance right here? This is the sinking air from the warm core low. So you're having all the rising air here. You need sinking air. So that's taking place right here. And so what that tells us is that the intensification and maturing of this tropical system is taking place right now. And it continues to evolve. This, to me, is a sign that this storm is going to be capable of continuing intensifying into a Category 2 and possibly touching Category 3 strength, about 315 as far as miles per hour. So with that, you get that evolution taking shape. There's your trough getting ready to pick up the storm, keeping us relatively safe. So that's why you're seeing all this clustering of the Malgines. And if you don't like the European, let's check out the GFS. Let's see what that looks like. I think that's AOL5, and there it is. So it's pretty clear where the Malgines is also picking up everything that we just talked about. So I want to make sure that we're clear about this, only because I've seen a lot of social media posts and videos about any type of threat. The only threat that this storm has going forward is for Bermuda, so I wouldn't go there, or shipping lanes. Other than that, should be fine for the East Coast. Although this weekend, I would watch out for some strong rip currents. So if you're heading out to the water, that might be a concern. It looks like the Mets are learning how to hit again. Look at that. Well, he's out. So again, this is why we're seeing the forecast here from the NHC. And again, we'll take all your questions as well moving forward that I'm already seeing. Very nice. Now, taking a look at the sea surface temperatures, a lot of changes starting to evolve here. Again, we're starting to see our La Nina starting to take shape here. It's taking its sweet time to actually organize. Our negative PDO is looking a little bit wilted right now. As we discussed last week, we'll have to see whether or not we see more cooling. Now, this was warmer last week, so we are seeing that return of cooler waters here. And so I kind of want to see again what this looks like in a couple of weeks, where we have our sustained negative PDO working with our La Nina. But again, it's very interesting to watch to see how all this is evolving. Of course, the Atlantic remains very warm. In this type of setup here, we're not seeing any influence from La Nina yet. Look, the SOI just isn't there. There's not much support. But I think that's going to change because of what's going on with the MJO expected to move into phase 2, 3, and clipping 4. What that will do is that it will enhance the atmospheric conditions for La Nina. It'll also lead to an uptick of activity in the tropical Atlantic. So I do expect more tropical activity. If you have friends and family in Florida down through the Gulf Coast, the rest of August and of course into September, you normally have to really keep an eye out for anything out there. One of the things that is a concern is that you get a stationary front hanging out in the Gulf of Mexico that can spawn up a tropical system very quickly without much notice. So we're going to definitely watch out for that. But this pattern also means that our trough axis is going to tend to be towards the East Coast. Look what we have here on the European, the GFS, and the European ensembles, the weakness along the East Coast. And that southwesterly wind component is going to really protect us and act like a shield. This is also going to allow for more polar air masses to invade our region. So one of the things, I shared this with a friend of mine who is not a big fan of temperatures in the 90s and high humidity. I don't see any sign of any type of regime of temperatures in the lower to mid 90s the rest of August. In fact, we might be able to pull this off through September, which would be great, especially after all the humidity. And the reason why we're seeing that is because during this time of year, because of the wavelengths, when you get this trough hanging out here around the West Coast, you tend to get a trough also hanging around the East Coast, and you kind of get this ridge in between from the Rockies to the plains. So the Rockies and the plains really heat up. The Gulf Coast, well, you guys are always hot. And then the East Coast stays cooler. Now, notice I'm not saying cool, I'm saying cooler. In terms of more cold fronts able to move through, more periods of polar air masses, and temperatures averaging pretty much near normal, at times touching a little bit below normal, with a higher potential for more dry air and less humidity. This also means we see less rainfall as well. So the model guidance is ranging anywhere from near to slightly below normal, and a lot of that, again, is going to be driven by convective precipitation. Of course, the wild card is that if we get like a remnant low hanging out down here towards the Gulf Coast that rides up a cold front, that could add to some rainfall potential. But right now, we're not really seeing all that much to support that. So our weather pattern over the next 90 hours is going to be not too bad. No major storms. We have a warm front that's going to be moving through on Saturday. So, of course, by the time we get to the weekend, we have a better chance for pesky showers. And that warm front will basically live through the region on Saturday. And then on Sunday, the cold front will follow with additional showers and thunderstorms. If you have outdoor plans for this weekend, my suggestion is to focus on Saturday, because Sunday is going to have a higher threat for showers and thunderstorms. Saturday, you'll still have showers to deal with, but they'll be more widely scattered with some overcast cloud cover in the morning. So definitely not the best beach weather weekend, that is for sure. And in terms of 850 millibar temperatures, I just kind of want to roll this through over the next 10 days. And we are nowhere near 20 degrees Celsius through this entire period, ranging anywhere between 9 degrees Celsius and 15 degrees Celsius, which basically puts our high temperatures in the mid 70s to mid 80s for the most part. So I'm sure that is some good news. Again, over the next 90 hours, watch out for a convective shower or two in the afternoons that we've been seeing. When you have a trough hanging around the region with cold air aloft, you can get some of these showers to pop off. Normally they happen over in the interior. They produce maybe 15 to 30 minutes of a brief heavy downpour, and then that's about it. Most locations see absolutely nothing but some fair weather cumulus clouds. So that's going to be a threat for tomorrow as well. Friday, pretty quiet. Saturday, there is a few of your pesky showers, and then Sunday, we'll deal with more showers rotating through. So with that, go here and let's dive into your questions, and we'll take the questions that we get, and then we'll see. I know it is a quiet weather week for the most part. We're not seeing any tropical threats impacting us immediately, and we're not up to the point where we can really talk about the weather. Although I did notice, what is it called? The Farmers Almanac is already putting out their winter weather forecast when we don't even know whether we have a real La Nina or not. So, hey, to each their own. Kind of ballsy, but we'll see how that works out. So let's dive into some of the questions. Okay, yes, happy hump day, happy Wednesday indeed, Ford. Let's see here. I'm glad that we were able to get online. I got worried there for a second. Okay, even the 18Z GFS doesn't have it close to being a threat for the U.S. coast. Yes, I agree. Look, I got a general rule, okay? This is how you know someone is trying to just get you to click on their video. When they start pulling off models that you really shouldn't use, like no gaps, I'm surprised that was even operational. The UK Met, the last hour, stuff like that. That's when you need to not use them as a source, because what they're doing is trying to find the model for their sensationalized discussion. When all the other models, I mean, you can't ask for a better agreement from the GFS and the European for what we see. Card X is a hypothesis theory where every event, let's see here, the theory isn't a theory at all, and it's certainly not science. Oh, okay, all right. Yeah, I think you're talking about the Climate Central stuff. Look, they're not going to answer my question because I asked them directly. Like, hey, what do you mean by this? Are you because what is your actual point in this? And let me check my X feed right now to see if they actually responded. They probably didn't. I want to be fair. I don't want to say they didn't respond and then they turns out that they responded while we're doing this. No, they haven't responded. So my point is this. You can't call something climate change when something happens when it should happen in the actual time period that you would expect it to happen. So, for example, a tropical system developing and intensifying into a hurricane in December, impressive. That definitely is climate change. A hurricane that rapidly intensifies from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5 because it went over very warm waters, that you could connect, potentially, depending on the location. Gulf Stream, not so much. Central Atlantic or in the Western Caribbean, yeah, you can make more of an argument with that. But a strong tropical storm, not even a hurricane, just a strong tropical storm in the Lesser Antilles, I mean, that's like par for the course. For them, that's like, oh, it's Monday. It's not as surprising of an event. All right. Now, if you have like multiple Cat 5s, like let's say you have 5 Cat 5s in a season, that would be something that you could make an argument for. Like the idea of a quiet August and September, don't understand people who want to get hit with severe storms, tornadoes, hurricanes. Snow, I get. Snow is fun. Tornadoes, Okay. Well, see, I think that there is as someone who now has a house, I certainly am not excited about seeing a hurricane anywhere near us. Rainfall, yes, because I'd rather really not have my shrubs die, okay? Snow, absolutely. Tornadoes, no thank you. So it makes me wonder, like, I guess maybe I should do a poll. If you want this type of weather, do you actually own a house or an apartment or whatever? Because I think if you own property, you don't want that. And I wouldn't even say own property. I mean, geez, for me, I was never excited about a tornado because my family was in the way. So while I do get the wonder and the excitement of forecasting for one, that excitement more is about making sure that my family is out of the way of those storms. Now, a snowstorm, if you're smart and you stay indoors, for the most part, is a fun situation. Obviously, there's also impacts with that, too, because if you have snow-covered roadways and someone has a heart attack or something, conditions aren't going to be that good for them, unfortunately. It's hard to get out to get the help that you need. So there is that factor. So I love forecasting the weather. I love forecasting for snow, obviously. But I never root for a major or a severe weather event or a category whatever hurricane impacting our neck of the woods, because we saw just with Sandy what type of destruction that can level onto people, and people who can't defend themselves and don't have the resources to rebuild. 250 millibar subtropical jet is healthy and amplified, notwithstanding the cooling Ensno region. Also looking at Earth New School, 70 millibars. There is no noticeable counterclockwise flow up in the polar regions. Yeah, we should start to see a real solidified polar vortex really start to get going the last week of August, early September, somewhere around there. As far as the subtropical jet stream, the lack of La Nina so far really has not allowed for our subtropical jet stream to weaken. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays a role in the rest of the hurricane season. This is going to be very interesting because, thus far, the season it's been pretty much on par, on pace for an average season so far. Ernesto developed at pretty much around the ballpark of the seasonal expectations that you would look for. Um, but the rest of the season has the potential of being very active. Now, it's interesting. In fact, here, let's see if I can pull up the data here. I want to see if I can pull up the rest of global cyclones. Yeah, so the rest of the Atlantic, let me pull this up here for you. Over the next 15 days, I mean, aside from Ernesto, really not seeing much in the way of activity. We see a little bit of an uptick off the African coast. But other than that, maybe you might get a tropical storm trying to pop up here between now and the end of the month. Not a lot of activity. Not a lot of activity at all. So that's some great news, at least from the model guidance point of view. So hopefully that remains the case as we move forward. Any thoughts on the Euro EPS monthly outlooks for January 2025? It shows a strong ridge on the East Coast with southerly flow aloft, temperatures 1 to 2 degrees above. That's from Matthew Myers. Here's the thing. I think we learned last year not to put a whole lot of stock in the long-range models. Staying that. If you get a La Nina to become established, the Southeast Ridge would certainly be a theme to keep an eye on. But the problem with that forecast is that it looks like it makes the assumption that there's a moderate La Nina or a strong La Nina, and that just simply isn't the case. So I wouldn't put a lot of stock into it. I wouldn't put a lot of focus in it right now. There's a lot we don't know in terms of how strong this La Nina is. Does a La Nina develop? That's a legitimate question right now. Does it just remain cold neutral? What type of impacts does it have on the 500 millibar pattern in terms of the jet stream couplets? What type of impact do we see in our polar vortex? Because right now we have a west-based QBO, which would suggest a stronger polar vortex. And if you get a stronger polar vortex, then you would more likely pull that colder air more towards the North Pole, which would support that ridge idea. But if you get a displacement, that kind of throws that forecast out. So there's a lot that we don't know. Part of that is going to be influenced by the observations we see. Siberian snow growth, the sea ice effect. But the real wild card, the real unknown that drives that whole forecast that you see for January 2025 is whether or not we have a La Nina, because it's showing a textbook La Nina pattern with a southeast ridge and the storm track up towards the Great Lakes. But there's a chance here we might not even see that and see more of a neutral ENSO effect. So the other day, the asteroid Apophis, I am horrible with these names, is supposed to pass around 20,000 miles from Earth on April 13th, 2029. April 13th, 2029 is a Friday. Yeah, it should look pretty cool. We like quiet weather. Yes, most people do. Some people do not. Hello, I noticed some smoke showing up on the HRR tomorrow. Could you comment? Absolutely. Our Canadian friends, once again, have a real hard time putting out forest fires. And much like what we had last year, now we have a northerly wind. Much of the summer, we've had a southwesterly wind, and we didn't have to deal or worry about any of this smoke. But unfortunately, we have a northerly wind now. And while we enjoy the low humidity, we also have to deal with the smoke. Now, the good news is that this is not going to be anywhere near what we experienced last year. Okay? If you have asthma or something like that, you're going to definitely feel the effects of this. So I would say try to stay indoors, make sure you have your medications, and just make sure that that you're prepared. But for everyone else, it's more of a nuisance, and it should make some pretty cool sunsets as well, as we've already seen based on some pictures I'm already seeing. So that is certainly something that is, pretty impressive. Unfortunately, we have to deal with the smoke that comes in from time to time. Not exactly the best thing. Is the Western Pacific quiet as well? For the most part, it's having a couple of tropical storms here, but nothing like no super typhoons or anything of that nature that would impact the northern Pacific. The general rule with the Pacific rule, because I know a lot of people like to look for tropical systems curving to the east of Japan. It's not just a tropical system. It has to be a tropical system category 3 or higher. Because if you just have a weak tropical storm or even a category 1 hurricane, it's not introducing enough latent heat release and enough of an impact on the polar jet stream to have an impact for us. But if you get a major hurricane lifting northward, that could definitely translate to a storm for us on the East Coast a couple of days later. That's some great questions, Adlin. Let me see what we got on YouTube. Let me refresh this and make sure we got all the questions. Okay. You need something like Newfoundland high block. Yes. Yeah, typically when you're looking for a storm impact on the East Coast, and this is even true with Sandy, you typically want to have a high, well, not want to have, but you typically look for a high pressure block somewhere around the Canadian Maritimes and Newfoundland. Any questions on X?
Nope.
No. All right. Well, I know it is a quiet night out there, so obviously. So, if we're not going to have any more questions, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover in terms of the weather impacts. I think we're going to call it an early night for tonight because we got everything covered. There's no severe weather, no major storms. It's actually nice. Of course, now that I'm not on vacation, it's nice and beautiful. That makes a whole heck of a lot of sense, right?
Chance to catch up with the weeds in the yard.
Yeah, that's true. So we're going to call it a night for tonight and have you guys get back to doing whatever you guys normally do when you're not here. As always, thank you again for joining us for our live chat. And hopefully we remain in a quiet weather pattern all the way through fall. It gives us time to make an excellent winter forecast. In the meantime, as always, stay safe out there.